Hey everyone, welcome to At the Intersection. It is once said that the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said that some people can be so heavenly minded they're of no earthly good. So, does heaven matter for those of us who are Christians? And why should it matter? Let's get at it and we'll talk about why heaven matters. Well, hello friends. This is Dennis Sanders, the pastor of First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Roseville, Minnesota. And welcome to At the Intersection. So, this past Sunday, I did something that I thought was rather risky. I decided to preach about heaven. Now, maybe to you that doesn't sound very risky, but it did to me. I was preaching actually from two passages, one from the Gospel of John and one from Acts. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, Jesus is talking to his disciples. He's actually getting ready to be arrested and then to die on the cross. And he talks early on in that chapter about going to prepare a place for his disciples. Now, a number of the commentaries that I was looking at as I prepared for the sermon tended to downplay any sense that Jesus talked about heaven. Now, I think that we who live in this modern age of ours, especially if we are part of mainline Protestant or progressive Christian traditions, tend not to talk about heaven a whole lot. In fact, there may be some that would rather we not talk about heaven at all. And there are some good reasons to not focus on heaven too much. Sometimes we can think so much about heaven that it's a way really to get people to not think about all of the injustices that are going on in the world. One theologian talked about how the concept of heaven, or at least looking at talking about heaven, was in some ways a way that slave owners were able to keep the enslaved in their place and to not focus on the evils of slavery. So heaven basically doesn't have a vaunted place among theologians and pastors these days, because it can be used in bad ways. But the fact of the matter is, I still believe in the concept of heaven, and I wanted to share why I think it matters. I didn't preach about it because I believe in escaping the problems of the world. In fact, I preached about it because, frankly, I need to hear a word of hope. We look at the news these days, and frankly, it feels at times the world is out of control. This past weekend, as I was preparing for the sermon, there was another mass shooting, this time outside of Dallas in a mall. There were several people who died, including 3 members of a family of 4. And a few days even earlier than that, there was the death of Jordan Neely, a man that was experiencing homelessness, that dealt with mental illness and had a history of violence. He was choked to death by an ex-Marine after Neely caused a disturbance on the subway in New York. We still don't know everything about this event, so it's really hard to try to make judgments, but there is still, in some sense, sadness. Sadness of a man gripped by mental illness. Sadness of someone who was homeless. Sadness for the people on the train and people who have, in some ways, been assaulted by Mr. Neely. There is sadness all around. Add to that, we deal with the ongoing war in Ukraine by Russian aggression, and there have been a steady beat of those stories that I've even talked about here on this video, where people have been shot by others simply because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. I've been talking about what seems like the breakdown in society in past videos, and frankly, that's what I'm talking about here. And it's easy to look at all of this mess, everything that's going on, and wonder, what in the world does heaven have to do with any of this? Why in the world would we even want to talk about this right now? It's kind of like how some people get upset, well, actually angry, when people talk about prayers, or thoughts and prayers, to be more exact, after a mass shooting. So why in the world preach about heaven? Why should heaven matter to those of us who are Christians? In the book of Acts, there is a story of Stephen. Now, Stephen was not an apostle. He was a deacon. In fact, he was one of the first deacons of the church. There was a case where they needed someone to take care of widows and orphans. So they were able to pick a few men who were able to serve. And he was someone that served to care for those who were in need. That didn't stop him from preaching the gospel. And one day he drew the ire of people, especially religious leaders, for what he was saying. At the moment when his life hung in the balance, he looks up to heaven. He looks up in the sky and says that he can see God and Jesus in heaven. But that was too much for the crowd, and they ended up stoning him to death. Stephen became one of the first martyrs of the church. So was Stephen an escapist who didn't care about what was happening in front of him? No. His whole job was to take care of widows and orphans. That's what he was called to do. No, but he was empowered by something. He was empowered by hope. He was powered by hope in a God that he believed prepared a place for him, not just in the future, but also now. He belonged to God. He risked his own life because he knew that at the end of all of this life, there was a place prepared for him. There was hope. How his life ended wasn't the end. Heaven gave him hope to do ministry in the here and the now. And I think that is what heaven is all about. It kind of reminds me a little bit about resurrection, because they are both about hope. It's about believing in a place. It's about believing in a time when evil and oppression don't have power. We live in that hope, knowing that the things that hold us down now won't be holding us down forever, because they've already been defeated by God, especially in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is what empowers us to pursue justice. That hope. That hope, because we know that as we pursue justice to help those who are in need, we know that even though the battle seems difficult, it's already been won. Even when we face setbacks, we know that God has already won, that the powers, the evils that hold us don't stand a chance. The writer and thinker C.S. Lewis wrote that believing in heaven isn't really about pie in the sky. It's not necessarily in the sweet by and by. It's actually about how we look in the here and now. And this is what he writes. A continually looking forward to the eternal world is not, as some modern people think, a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but one of the things a Christian is meant to do. Does not mean that we are to leave the present world as it is. If you read history, you will find that Christians who did the most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this one. Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, you will get neither. I believe in heaven, not because I want to escape this world, and not because I want to ignore injustice. I believe in heaven because I believe in a just world, and I believe that God is working through you and through me to make this world justice. And I work for justice because I know and believe and trust in God that one day in heaven, whether that's heaven up there in the sky or heaven here, the things that oppress us now will be gone, will be defeated. I don't know what heaven will be like. As I said, maybe it's in the clouds, but maybe it's a restored earth that is recreated in the way that God intended. What I do know is that heaven will be a place where justice shall reign, where God's love will rule, where there will be no more hunger, no more sickness, no more sorrow, no more loneliness, and where the devil and his minions will be defeated. In a world that is filled with mass shootings and war and hatred, that is news that I need to hear. That is good news I need to hear. That is a word of hope. Take care, everyone. Godspeed, and I'll see you soon.